The Nine-Tailed Fox sect, in addition to our famed Nine-Tailed Fire Fox technique and powerful martial arts, is also famed for producing many spirit engravers and blacksmiths. Elder Zhao had taken the initiative to explain to us the prestige of the Nine-Tailed Fox sect. After the second stage of the examination, only a total of about 100 candidates had managed to pass and reach the third stage. We were then led into a cavern built into the middle of the volcano, where many small forging furnaces lay. Beneath each furnace were small amounts of low-quality fire crystals, and on a nearby table, various types of spirit materials were neatly spread out for our use. While I held my token and followed Tong Shui, each of us was led to one furnace under the direction of Lian Ru, while Elder Zhao's voice droned on and on in the background. Liang Xiaoyang and Yin Jin Jin had also passed the exam and were standing in front of their own furnaces. The latter had warmed up to me because of my contribution earlier, and she nodded at me. Lian Ru finally had help in the form of 9 other Nine-Tailed Fox sect disciples, who followed her lead and directed the 100 or so candidates to their respective furnaces. These spirit-engraved armaments are used in every sect and martial arts organization. Elder Zhao informed us proudly as the flames in the flame volcano flickered, casting insidious shadows over his face. They are crafted by disciples of our sect. He then swept his gaze over us. That is why the Nine-Tailed Fox sect remains influential and powerful in the Great Zhou Empire. Even the Martial Arts Alliance has to respect us. I'm sure they did, or they were most likely plotting something behind your back to usurp you of your power. Like all other cliché wuxia stories. The Nine-Tailed Fox sect consists of the inner sect and the outer sect, Elder Zhao continued gravely. Once you become outer sect disciples, you'll eventually have a chance to become inner sect disciples if we see that you have the potential, and we will have actual, authentic Master Spirit engravers train you. The lights above seemed to brighten along with the smouldering flames that burned at the center of the cavern. The 111 of you have passed the second stage of the outer sect examination, Elder Zhao told us with relish. I gulped at that. The examination had certainly been brutal. Out of the 400-plus candidates who had originally registered to take the examination, 75% of us had been eliminated, and only 111 of us remained. That was quite the intimidating prospect, now that I thought about it. To be fair, the theoretical exam had eliminated half of that number, so only about 100 got eliminated by the second stage of the exam. To be fair, if you couldn't pass the theory exam, I doubted you would be able to pass the second stage of the exam, where you had to distinguish between the spirit engravings and climb the appropriate pillars to reach the mountaintop. Everything has been prepared for all of you, Elder Zhao declared as he gestured at the materials lying on our tables. I assume you all already know what we want you to do. That's right. It's pretty obvious, isn't it? You're all to forge a spirit armament. Any elemental affinity, metal, wood, water, fire, or earth, is fine. Of course, metal armaments are the easiest to forge, especially when you recall that forging and combining metals require the simplest processes. That said, you have free rein to forge whatever you want. Use whatever spirit materials you want. It doesn't have to be all of them. And create whatever gear you want. Armor, swords, hammers, spears, bows, arrows, axes, whatever. Anything is fine as long as you can create it. After pacing around, Elder Zhao finally stopped at the middle of the cavern and turned around to face all of us. With a holler, he swung down his hand. Without further ado, let the third exam begin. Liang Xiaoyang, Tong Shui, and Yin Jing Jing all seemed to move at the exact same moment, immediately igniting their fire crystals and lighting up their furnaces. Everyone else followed closely a few seconds later, sparking their fire crystals to life and lighting up their furnaces. I was the only one who hadn't started up the fire yet. Instead, I picked up and identified each and every spirit material I had available to me. Auric gold, crimson copper, ethereal silver. Running through the names in my mind, I wondered what sort of spirit armament I could forge with them. I had only created weapons out of ice, but obviously that wouldn't be enough to pass this Nine-Tailed Fox sect examination. For one thing, my ice weapons weren't meant to last long. Not only would they melt within the intense heat of the furnaces clustered within this enclosed cavern before long, they weren't sturdy enough to maintain their existence beyond an hour or two. That wasn't something I could call a spirit armament. No, they were pretty much forgeries. Imitations. Fake weapons projected temporarily into existence to serve a specific function before disappearing forever. So what exactly should I do? Well, since ice weapons are the ones I have most familiarity with, thanks to my elemental affinity and techniques, I might as well stick to those. Ice was just water element imbued with more yin-chi than yang-chi. And Elder Zhao said we were allowed to forge weapons with the water elemental affinity. The aforementioned Elder Zhao was moving around the group, observing this year's batch. He was keeping a close eye on Liang Xiaoyang, Yin Jingjing, and Tong Shui, ensuring that he didn't stray too far from their positions. Not only did these three have the highest martial arts cultivation of all the examinees, their backgrounds were also far from ordinary. They most likely had studied forging armaments within their own sects before coming to take the exam. That was why, whether it was their experience or their techniques, Elder Zhao couldn't help but be impressed with them. He was confident that these three would not only pass the examination without a hitch and would be this year's top disciples. In fact, he would bet on them attaining the chance to enter the inner sect before long. As for me, he only asked me to join on a whim, but he was just as aware as I was that I didn't have the background or talent necessary to forge artifacts. He was impressed by my trick with the ice pillars during the second stage of the exam, though, so he naturally glanced in my direction from time to time. I was afraid I had to disappoint him because I was taking my time to identify the spirit materials and come up with a weird design for an artifact. Of course, being an impartial invigilator who had one eye on the future of the sect, Elder Zhao would naturally pay more attention to the actual talented prodigies who had a high chance of becoming inner sect disciples in the future, so that he could make preparations in advance. Senior who? Senior who? Why are you here? A fiery red figure suddenly appeared within the cavern, dressed in a skimpy pink and white dress, while her long, pink hair flowed breezily in the wafts of hot air that rose from the numerous furnaces. It was a beautiful 17 or 18-year-old girl. Even the loose blacksmith robe that she wore over her pink and white dress was unable to conceal the seductive curves of her body, which included her ample chest and wide hips. That gorgeous figure alone was able to tempt any man and fill his heart with nearly uncontrollable lust. Or something like that, anyway. I mean, you could probably guess what sort of descriptions came with beautiful girls in Wuxia or Xianxia story by now. Just be glad I didn't resort to using white, jade-like skin, okay? As soon as she showed up, the eyes of all the male nine-tailed fox sect disciples present were immediately drawn to her. Filled with excitement and desire, they managed to clamp down on their blossoming emotions and greeted her politely. Even the male examinees were distracted despite trying to focus all their attention on forging. Their concentration began to slip as they occasionally snuck glances at her gorgeous figure while crafting their armaments. Mayer, why are you here today? Elder Zhao asked with a warm smile. He waved at her as she bounced about the cavern, and then continued. Well, it's good that you're here. Since you've come all the way here, you might as well help me grade them. There are a few outstanding youths in this batch, so you might want to take note. Keep them in mind and think about who you want as your assistant later. You'll get a chance a few days later. Uncle Zhao, Hu Mei'er greeted him enthusiastically. Sorry for disturbing the exam. I came here today so that I can choose a few people to be my assistant. All the promising candidates from previous years have already been picked by my fellow disciples. This time I'll make sure not to miss out on any of them. Her blue eyes sparkled like sapphire as a pretty smile curved across her lovely face. There was some sort of elegant charm to the way she seemed to shyly avoid the looks of the examinees in the cavern. Ha ha! Elder Zhao chortled. It's your fault for being arrogant the previous few times. You thought there weren't any promising candidates and dismissed the exams. In the end, there were a few outstanding candidates who helped your fellow disciples plenty by properly separating and refining spirit materials. thus saving them a lot of time and energy. Who asked you to miss out on the batches from the previous years? Humea sulked at that. But before that, there weren't any promising candidates, and they barely passed the exams. There wasn't even a single one I could use, so I ended up giving up on all those new recruits. Well, don't worry. I can guarantee you that you'll be able to find some talented assistants this time around, Elder Zhao assured her with another chuckle. Though I'm afraid some of them will already be taken by others. He glanced pointedly at Tong Shui's direction, suspecting that he would only follow Lian Ru. Lian Ru probably already had dibs on him as well. I understand. Hu Mei nodded with a smile and began hovering around the courtyard like a ghost, drifting next to each examinee to observe their armament forging process and spirit engravings. Unfortunately for these examinees, when they realized that she was nearby, her presence preceded by an intoxicating fragrance. They would lose focus and began to make mistakes and become sloppy with their refining methods. Hu Mei could only shake her head in disappointment and then leave for the next examinee. Her pink figure ghosted across the shadows of the cavern, almost like a dancing butterfly in a meadow. Most of the candidates ended up glancing at her with lustful eyes, and even those who weren't approached directly by Hu Mei. Couldn't help but cast their gazes in the direction of her beautiful figure. Apparently, they forgot the reason why they were here in the first place. Again, another useless person who isn't able to focus on forging armaments and control his state of mind. Hu Mei sighed and shook her head. Despite her disillusionment, she continued to move around. More candidates ended up losing focus in order to drool over her seductive figure, her flirty movements throwing their concentration off. However, unaware of her own charm, Hu Mei could only feel let down. Mei, there are 3 people you should pay close attention to, Elder Zhao informed her gently. They might just be the candidates you're looking for. The moment Hu Mei returned to his side, Elder Zhao directed her attention toward Liang Xiaoyang, Yin Jingjing, and Tong Shui. He made sure to stay a good distance away and kept his voice down, lest they overhear him and flatter themselves. They have great potential, their backgrounds are extraordinary, and they clearly have experience in forging armaments. I'm confident that they will pass the examination. Liang Xiaoyang, Yin Jingjing, and Tong Shui were located near the front of the cavern. Hu Mei had previously passed through there in her first round, having realized that the trio were the center of attention. She nodded gratefully at Elder Zhao's reminder and proceeded toward the front row. Dropping beside Liang Xiaoyang in an elegant movement, she peered over his shoulder. Liang Xiaoyang immediately tensed up, his aura turning murderous. Far from being intimidated, Hu Mei actually brightened up in excitement. She cheerfully approached the furnace, her eyes glinting passionately, and she stared at Liang Xiaoyang with an adoring and smitten gaze. Unfortunately, this was one of Hu Mei's usual modus operandi. A fiery, passionate stare of adoration. Up to the present, she had not failed even once in using this to charm a man. There were very few men who could resist her charms. Apparently, when forging an armament, there was very room for error. If one was distracted, even for a second, their movements would be affected, and even the most minor effects would show in the refining process. Aware of this, Hu Mei observed Liang Xiaoyang's every move. She placed a finger on her lips as she watched passionately. Liang Xiaoyang remained unmoved for now. Compared to the other candidates, he was much calmer and a lot more focused. Even when he was under her intense, passionate gaze, Liang Xiaoyang continued to focus his attention on the furnace in front of him and handled the spirit materials with utmost care. He was meticulous in his techniques, measuring the exact same quantities of spirit materials and melting them upon the furnace whenever necessary. The complete opposite of me, who had no idea what I was doing and randomly throwing arbitrary quantities of spirit materials into the furnace without any care for exact quantities and volumes. As I said before, I didn't care much for the quantification of anything. I was all heart and emotion, and opposed to positivism. In contrast, there was not even the tiniest mistake in every single action of Liang Xiaoyang. I was so jealous of him in that regard. Hu Mei, Nodded in approval, surprised and impressed by Liang Xiaoyang's commitment to forging stuff. The seductive smile on her lovely face widened, and everyone looking at her couldn't help but feel a flash of desire. Without breaking away, Hu Mei gently nudged into the space beside and behind Liang Xiaoyang and intentionally pressed her chest against his arm. She leaned closer to whisper into his ear with a throaty chuckle. "You're a little different from the other men, aren't you?" As expected, even Liang Xiaoyang's self-control crumbled a little at that. The fingers on his left hand trembled slightly as he drew a deep breath. Crack! Unfortunately, that was more than enough to cause him to slip up, and he inadvertently crushed a piece of crimson copper into powder. Hu Mei glanced at him before withdrawing abruptly, her elegant lips curling in disdain, even as she maintained that beautiful smile. "I guess you're not that different after all." No longer paying any attention to poor Liang Xiaoyang, she changed her target and proceeded toward Tong Shui this time. "Oh wow, I thought Liang Xiaoyang would be able to ignore Senior Hu's charm, but I guess he's a guy after all." Still, he did very well to resist all the way until the end. He's doing much better than the other guys taking the exam. Yeah, Senior Hu has been the sect's second most talented disciple for the past 10 years, second only to Senior Tang. She has also been one of the most beautiful disciples as well, on par with Senior Tang. Yeah, if she wasn't so young, both she and Senior Tang will be the top 2 people in the inner sect. They're both geniuses when it comes to spirit engraving and forging spirit armaments. Hi. I wish I could be chosen by either Senior Hu or Senior Tang. I would be satisfied even if the only thing I do every day is polish spirit materials for them. Me too. The few outer sect disciples who were helping out with invigilating the exam sighed as they whispered to each other along the walls of the cavern. They all glanced at Hu Mei, clearly infatuated with her beauty. Really, you guys should aspire to reach higher. Eish! Senior Tang! The outer sect disciples jumped when Tang Qihong suddenly showed up. She placed her hands on her hips and glared at them. "What kind of nonsense are you guys babbling about?" "Eek, forgive us." Fortunately for them, Lian Ru came to the rescue. "Qihong, what are you doing here?" "Oh, of course I'm here to look at the potential candidates. Like Senior Hu, I'm looking for an assistant." Tang Qihong couldn't help but glance in my direction and grew a little worried when she saw the mess I was creating. Lian Ru couldn't help but giggle. "Don't worry. I'm sure Fei Wu will find a way." "Who says I'm worried about him? And why does it have to be Fei Wu?" Tang Qihong was flustered and then tried to divert Lian Ru's attention away from me. "Rather than me and Fei Wu, shouldn't you be more worried about Tong Shui?" While the 2 girls and the male outer sect disciples were whispering to each other, Hu Mei had made her way toward Tong Shui, suddenly appearing beside him. Tong Shui had originally been focusing on forging his armament. When Hu Mei appeared beside him, he simply smiled at her. Unfortunately, I couldn't afford to pay much attention to their conversation because one of the sea sapphire crystals just condensed, and I had to focus every bit of attention I had into crafting it into a long shape. By the time I finished that, it seemed that their conversation had taken quite the unusual turn. Hu Mei's brow was twitching in annoyance as she was forced to listen to Tong Shui ramble on and on about something. "I'm very sorry, Senior Hu. Even though I admit that you're beautiful, but my heart already belongs to someone else." Even as he conversed, fiery and shadowy qi blended and amalgamated as he skillfully crafted his artifact. "Would you like to know who that person is? Should I tell you who she is?" There was no need to. It was obvious that the person his heart belonged to was none other than Lian Ru. "I think it's best if you focus on forging your spirit armament." Hu Mei told him as a bead of perspiration rolled down her face. Hu Mei had originally intended to test Tong Shui's mental fortitude, which was why she had approached him with a bright smile, but he ended up turning the tables on her by rambling on about his beloved Lian Ru. That guy was remarkable. I should learn from him. Unable to deal with Tong Shui, Hu Mei had no choice but to withdraw. This kid. On the other side of the cavern, Elder Zhao burst out laughing. "I told you there's no need to worry about Tong Shui," Lian Ru told Tang Qihong, her expression half flattered and half triumphant. Tang Chi-hong could only wave her best friend's remark away and chuckle sourly. Yeah, you're so lucky. Hu Mei gave Tongxia one final glare before she gave up and withdrew. As much as she wanted to affect him and throw off his focus, she wasn't sure she could stand listening one more second about how deeply he was in love with Lian Ru, or she might actually throw up. She chose to instead glance in Yin Jingjing's direction. However, she shook her head and whispered silently to herself. She's a girl. There's nothing I can do about her then. She finally returned to Elder Zhao's side with a sigh. I guess Liang Xiaoyang's the most useful of the bunch. What about the other two? Elder Zhao inquired with a smile. You're kidding, right? Lian Ro can have that Tongshe guy since it's obvious that they're so deeply in love with each other. That's... Lian Ru mumbled as she blushed, but she was unable to deny that. Tang Chi-hong, who was beside her, giggled and placed an encouraging hand on her best friend's shoulder. As for Yin Jingjing, I'll have no choice but to wait until she finishes forging her spirit armament. I'll be sure to keep an eye on her. But Hu Mei's shoulders drooped slightly. By that time that happens, the rest of the seniors would have arrived by then, and I might not be able to pick the assistant I want. I see. Should I book Liang Xiaoyang for you then? Do you mind waiting a bit? I'll take another look. If there really isn't anyone suitable enough, then I'll have no choice but to pick Liang Xiaoyang. Hu Mei frowned in dissatisfaction. She obviously didn't seem pleased to settle for Liang Xiaoyang despite him clearly being heads and shoulders above the rest. I shook my head, thinking that her expectations were incredibly unrealistic and too high. As much as I resented Liang Xiaoyang for the stunts he pulled during the second stage of the exam, his peerless skill and incredible talent were undeniable, not to mention his focus was nearly unrivaled. Who do you have your eyes on, Junior Tang? Hu Mei asked spitefully. Apparently the two girls had something of a bitter rivalry and clearly didn't get along well with each other. Tang Chi-hong narrowed her eyes and folded her arms. I don't see how it's any of your business. It'll probably be a useless trash anyway. Hu Mei regarded her number one rival with scorn and turned away. She then returned to the center of the 100 or so aspiring blacksmiths in hopes of finding someone suitable. This time, she decided to explore the corners and edges of the crowd where she hadn't ventured toward previously. Perhaps she would get lucky and have a fortuitous encounter. While wandering around the edges, Hu Mei flitted from candidate to candidate, intently scrutinizing them one by one. And occasionally she would approach her target and stare at him passionately. The poor guy would be distracted and made a mistake, or commit some sort of sloppy maneuver during the delicate refining process. When that happened, Hu Mei would immediately leave and select a new target to test. Unfortunately, she ran into disappointment again and again, no matter which target she chose, at least until she finally neared my position and felt the bone-numbing chill that emanated from my not-so-fiery furnace. By that point, Hu Mei had grown disillusioned and wasn't paying much attention to me or any of the remaining candidates. There are only a few people left, she remarked to herself. Oi, I can hear you, you know. If I still can't find anyone, then I have no choice but to choose Liang Xiaoyang. She said that as if it was a bad thing. The guy was destined for great things, and I could see him very well becoming one of the top blacksmiths or martial artists in the nine-tailed fox sect. His future was limitless. Yet for some reason Hu Mei wasn't satisfied with him. I guess this was a situation of a fool not knowing just how fortunate she really was. But who Hu Mei chose was none of my business, and I had to pass this exam, firstly to spite Liang Xiaoyang, and secondly so that I wouldn't let Tang Chi-hong down. Brah! Feeling the icy cold that emanated from my furnace, Hu Mei couldn't help but feel surprised. Her jaw dropped when she saw what I was doing. Huh? What is that young man doing? He's using an ice technique to forge a spirit artifact. How does that work? So strange. While she was musing to herself and observing me, those thoughts stopped right in her head when she caught sight of what I was forging. I've never seen such a spirit armament before. That was because I was trying to forge not a conventional weapon like a sword or spear or shield, but a gun. There were no guns or rifles or projectile weapons in this timeline. mostly because they were obsolete and pointless. Not when people could shoot fireballs or icicles out of their hands. If you could fire off chi blasts with your bare hands, what need had you of a gun? That was why the firearms technology in this timeline extended no more than bows and arrows. But there were bows and arrows, which meant that I could apply that same ranged projectile weapon concept to guns. There was no reason why I couldn't infuse the bullets with chi and create a devastating ranged weapon that would be far more effective than spirit bows and arrows. Spirit guns were cool. At least that was what I thought. Anyway, presently, I was moulding the shape of the gun using ice, sculpting the firing pin, the barrel, the breech, the firing bolt, the spring, the grip and the muzzle separately. First, using ice as a blueprint, I poured the metals into the icy moulds and began to harden them with chi. Part by part, I began assembling the rifle together and then inscribed the only spirit engraving I knew, one I learned while cultivating heaven and earth formula. The complex mechanisms, well, it wasn't that complex if you knew how to do it, and the myriad of parts required to assemble a single rifle wasn't something that Humea had seen before. She couldn't help but feel fascinated, despite not being able to comprehend the true nature of the deadly ranged weapon. But she was definitely impressed. A mischievous smile crept over her beautiful face, which then curled in a seductive manner. She wore the same passionate gaze that she had successfully used on all the other guys in the cavern as she stared at me and emanated her undefeatable charm. Despite being very aware and self-conscious of Humea being so close to me in proximity, I tried my best not to look at her. For one thing, I could feel Tang Chi Hong's terrifying glare on me. The message was clear. If I fell to Humea's charms, she would personally kill me, even though we weren't officially going out or anything. Wow, a woman's jealousy was absolutely terrifying. I was more afraid of what Tang Chi Hong would do to me than being tempted by Humea's beauty and passionate, adoring gaze. Glancing in Tang Chi Hong's direction to assure her that I wouldn't crumble, I then returned my attention to my ice rifle. Oh, I see how it is. Humea had caught the exchange between me and Tang Chi Hong, and she understood the situation. The smile on her lovely face grew wider as she began to scheme something in those dark corners of her mind. This wasn't good. I felt like a new toy that Humea had just discovered, and knew that she was going to start playing with me. An interesting fella like Xianxia. I see, so you're the assistant that Junior Tang Chi Hong picked. Let me see if I can steal you away from her. To be honest, Humea had no interest in my abilities or talent, or the lack of it, actually. She was nursing a grudge against Tang Chi Hong for suddenly appearing a couple of years ago and stealing her #1 disciple spot away from her, as well as rivaling her in beauty. That was why she resented Tang Chi Hong, and she decided to get back at her by stealing what belonged to her. But it wasn't as if I belonged to Tang Chi Hong. I wasn't sure how I felt about being treated like an object, but it certainly did not feel pleasant. Nonetheless, I had more important things to worry about, such as trying to successfully inscribe the spirit engraving I had in mind on the gun. This was important, as it would distinguish the gun from a normal one if it could draw upon chi from the spirit engraving. Oh. Apparently, because I was afraid of Tang Chi Hong and thus able to resist her charms, Humea grew even more interested in me, thinking that I had somehow surpassed her expectations. Which I didn't, but whatever. Let's hope you won't disappoint me. I wonder if you'll be able to hold out for a while longer. Suddenly she giggled, and in a flash, her voluptuous figure was pressing on my left. Smiling, she closed in and whispered into my ear seductively. That's an interesting armament you're forging. I've never seen it before. Do you mind telling me the details of what you're crafting? Her sizable breasts were scant centimeters away from my left arm, and for some reason I could feel fevered heat radiating from her gorgeous figure. The girl was sure pouring on the charm on a plebeian like me. Those rosy red lips, that sweet fragrance that wafted from her seemingly delicate body as she moved, those fiery, passionate eyes, and the attractive figure that approached to an uncomfortably close distance. Right now, her allure had exceeded human parameters, and the desirable heat she emanated was hot enough to melt even solid rock. Gulp. The male nine-tailed fox sect members that were assisting Elder Zhao and Lian Ru in invigilating couldn't help but gulped as they watched Hu Meier's alluring, seductive figure pour on her charm to the max. While they struggled to suppress the lust rising within them, Tang Qihong gritted her teeth and glared murderously at her rival. As much as Tang Qihong wanted to swoop down and pull Hu Meier away, she was afraid of kicking up a scene and disrupting the examination. She wasn't selfish enough to put her own feelings ahead of the sect's important exam, knowing that throwing a fit here and creating drama would throw the focus of the candidates more than Hu Meier already did, and cause most of them to fail for sure, so she clenched her fists and reined in her anger. It was also because Tang Qihong trusted me. Recognizing that, I vowed not to betray her trust and focus my attention entirely on my rifle. Seeing my efforts, Tang Qihong relaxed a little and smiled somewhat happily. "We're both lucky, aren't we?" Lian Ru murmured mischievously. Tang Qihong blushed. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I'm sure you don't." While Elder Zhao glanced in disapproval at the outer sect disciples in the cavern who were openly drooling and displaying their lust on their faces, probably thinking some nonsense about them having no mental fortitude and being doomed to spend the rest of their lives in the outer sect. I would honestly give them a lot more credit than that. I continued to shape more of the stuff. Reaching for an Arctic wolf's monster core, which was one of the spirit materials provided, I began integrating the material into my snow rifle. The nine-tailed fox sect, after all, didn't just provide ores, crystals, and metals for forging. One of the necessary materials required for spirit-engraved gears were the monster cores of magical beasts, which was why they were often in high demand. As long as demonic cores used to be the central part of a magical beast, it would contain the densest amount of the creature's qi, which was pretty much the traces of the magical beast's soul. By binding this soul to the spirit armament through spirit engravings, we would be able to grant the weapons the spiritual abilities of these deadly magical beasts. The Arctic wolf, for example, was known for its blizzard breath. If I succeeded, the bullets of my ice rifle would be able to freeze the opponent. At that time, I didn't know what Hu Meier was doing there. I had no idea she was here just to choose an assistant. I was too far away from the front to hear her conversation with Elder Zhao, and I wasn't paying much attention to her antics around Liang Xiaoyang and the rest. Most of the stuff I had here was written on hindsight. After I gathered the accounts from Tang Qihong, Lian Ru and Tong Shui much later. Presently, I assumed that she was only here to intentionally create trouble and cause people to fail the exam, especially since she was pressing her shapely body closer, which was disrupting the next step of my spirit engraving. I couldn't help but feel annoyed. Furthermore, Tang Qihong's gaze had grown cold again, and I was getting annoyed at her being irritated over something that absolutely was not my fault. Growing weary, I sighed. This is really an interesting armament. If you don't want to tell me what it is, then can you at least tell me where you learn this spirit engraving from?" Hu Meier's smile was dazzling even as she pressed her curvaceous body closer toward me. I could almost see a vein bulging in Tang Qihong's temple, and Lian Ru had to physically restrain her to stop her from jumping down and attacking the bitch. I didn't realize it at that time, but Tang Qihong was growing infuriated, because from her point of view, it looked as if Hu Meier was literally getting impatient to lie down on top of me or something. Thanks to that, the surrounding candidates couldn't help but turn to stare, their lustful eyes fixated on her seductive figure. Knowing that I had to do something before Tang Qihong snapped, broke free of Lian Ru's grip and charged down here to fight with Hu Mei. Right in the middle of the nine-tailed fox sect's outer sect disciple examination, I resorted to drastic measures. "I'm counting on you, buddy." Ignoring Hu Meier's question, I instead infused the Arctic wolf's monster core with more of my purified frosty yin qi. The volatile reaction caused sparks to fly from the slowly assembling rifle, and they scattered toward Hu Meier. Unaware of the sparks, Hu Meier continued to lean into me. Her irritation was visible on her face, and I could see that she was clearly thinking to herself, "Do you really think you can ignore me? I'm curious to see how long you can hold out against my seduction techniques." Suddenly, she felt a strange, cold sensation spreading rapidly around her body. Stumbling back from shock, she glanced down, and her lovely expression turned into one of horror. Her thin pink and white dress was freezing over, a thick layer of ice coating the fabric and hardening over her skin. "Oh no, I'm frozen solid!" Humayur shrieked in panic.